welcome to this session. My name's Julia Spicer from Engage and Create Consulting here in Gundawindi, and I'm really looking forward to spending the next 50 minutes with you all today. You'll see another friendly face beside me. Before I introduce this friendly face, I just wanted to check in and remind you around the session that or the conversation that we're going to be having with you this afternoon, and this will be an interactive session. We've got some questions that we want to ask you, so we're really looking forward to the chat function of this session being used quite a lot. So this is going to be a discussion. We don't have slides. This is about us sharing some stories and some of the trends and ideas that we're seeing across regional Australia. The purpose of this is to really look at, the skills and the magic and what is happening across this great country of ours, and particularly the role that women are playing in small business and in startups across Australia. So we want to be able to really share some of our stories, share some of our networks, and we're really clear around what we're hoping we can leave you with today. I might just note that in sunny Gundawindi, we've just started a massive storm, so let's hope that the fabulous internet that regional Australia is known for holds out for this session. But we will roll with what we've got because we're all innovators and entrepreneurs, and that's what we do. So let me introduce this friendly face that I have here with me today, and this is my dear friend Jo Palmer. Jo's based on a farm with her husband and young family at The Rock in southern New South Wales, and is the founder and managing director of Pointer Remote. Jo is a teacher by trade, and I'm sure there's lots of us that are here with us for the next 50 minutes who started a career some time ago and have changed and bounced around over the years. But Jo is a teacher by trade and is an Exhibit A, we are going to call Jo for this session, on how to start, run and exit businesses in the bush. Jo's first business operated across 3 towns with 30 plus staff, and her second was co-founded with a friend of hers when they were both living and working on farms, and they were running this business remotely together. And then her third business, Pointer Remote, was founded in 2017 and supports communities, business and individuals to really leverage remote work. And this is a big conversation that we want to have with you this afternoon. As I said, it was founded in 2017, and little did Jo know then, or maybe she does have some secret crystal ball there at The Rock, about the fact that fast forward a few years, we would all be working remotely. And so part of the conversation today is around what are opportunities for you in maybe metropolitan areas, in startups and business. How can you actually work with those of us in the bush that are actually used to this remote working? We've been doing it for a long time, and we want to be able to talk with you about that. So what does Pointer Remote do? And I am going to let Jo share some of this, but I wanted to introduce it. And it really runs capacity building programs in communities to support local governments, business chambers, business owners, people who are looking to get back into the workforce or work remotely. And they run bespoke training for companies and individuals and have a recruitment platform to advertise remote jobs and help people find remote work. For Jo's work in rural communities, she has won a whole lot of awards, and I'm going to rattle just a few of them off here for you so you know the legend that is with us today. She was the 2017 SOAR Awards Regional Contribution winner and the finalist in the Regional Australia Institute's Light Bulb Moments, both of those happening in 2017, being a regional online heroes. In 2018, she was a finalist in the Crow Awards Startup Superstar and the Young Entrepreneur Awards. And in 2019, and I think this is probably one where if there's any regional, rural or remote people on this session this afternoon, her face will look most familiar because Jo is the national winner of the AgriFutures Rural Women's Award for 2019, which sneakily she gets to hold on to for for an extra year at least. So can I please get everybody to give Jo a very big virtual round of applause for joining us this afternoon. Hello,
thanks, Thank you. Oh my gosh, it sounds horrific actually hearing someone reel it all off. Like, thank you.
It's always better than saying it yourself, though, I think.
Very true, very true. Well, I am going to replay the favour, and I am going to give Jules an introduction. And again, hers reads like a Wilbur Smith or Bryce Courtney, like that. I've got very reliable, largely stacked books that are holding my screen up today. So it's a big, thick book, several of them, as is your bio, Jules. So let me introduce the fabulous Julia Spicer. Jules started Engage and Create Consulting from Gundawindi about 8 years ago. And Jules is exhibit B of someone who regionally starting a business, quite often like many of us did, was because there wasn't a job that was appropriate to her skill set or knowledge and experience. And so when there isn't a job for you, you just create your own, and just that same old thing of just starting a business, because that's the easiest way to do things, isn't it? I say that very sarcastically. So a year later, when talking with another home-based business, Jules created the Gundawindi Business Hub as a place to get those businesses out of the home office or the kitchen table into a place in the main street of Gundawindi. So this place that the two of them start with then became a hub in Gundawindi for other startups and other small businesses that wanted a space to be able to run their businesses. They may have been servicing the main street of Gundy, but they also could have had clients nationally or internationally. So Jules just, again, creating a space when there wasn't one there for her. So good on you, champ, there. Engage and Create Consulting focuses on the viability and vibrancy of businesses and community organisations across regional Australia. So Jules and her team work with regional communities across the country on a range of projects, with a focus on identifying needs in businesses and implementing creative solutions to address them. I don't want to miss any of this, so let me read it. Okay. Her passion lies with small business, sustainable agriculture, and regional women in leadership. She also has a very guilty pleasure of breeding chickens and guinea pigs, and then tries to palm them off onto her friends. So buyer beware, if you're in the main street of Gundawindi and you drop in, you'll most likely leave with a feathered or furry friend. Advocacy is also very important to Jules, and she will often be the regional or rural voice at the table. In 2018, Jules was one of the 100 Faces of Small Business for the Queensland Government and listed as one of the Australian Financial Review's 100 Women of Influence Awards. Well done. That's very impressive to see your name there. In 2017, Julia won the Queensland Regional, Rural and Remote Business Owner of the Year, and Jules was listed as Regional Development Australia for Darling Downs, Southwest Queensland. Oh, sorry, she was a board member for Regional Development Australia, Darling Downs, Southwest Queensland. You guys have got like literally the worst tongue twister of all the RDAs in Australia, I think.
Name, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and is a member of the Queensland Government's Small Business Advisory Council. So your turn to receive virtual applause for just being quite the clever chook that you are.
Thanks, Bex, for the virtual applause on the slido as well. I saw that come through. Thank you. So clearly, Joe and I are awesome. No. I guess there's a few reasons that we wanted to share this. One is you have two people in front of you. There's 8.8 million people living in regional Australia. We are but two. We are going to pretend and generalise on behalf of the other 8.8 for the next 50 minutes. But I guess we wanted to kind of set the scene a little bit around why we think we can do that a bit, but also because we're going to really share a whole lot of stories about other people who are doing fantastic work across the country, and we want to really use this platform to also help amplify them. So any of the names that we mention this afternoon, any of the businesses that we talk about, we would actually really love it if an action from this session is that you follow them on social media, you connect with people on LinkedIn and tell them that Joe and Jules sent you. You know, think about how you can engage the businesses that we talk about in this next 40 odd minutes into the work that you do. So that we're really intentional around why we're doing this. So we know that 2020 has been tough. We are sitting in a virtual conference at the moment. We've been watching a whole lot of great presenters today on a whole lot of different topics. But this world of virtual conferencing has been a relatively new thing for a lot of us, and that's as a result of what 2020 has brought to us. And we know that it's been heavy going for many of us. But if we think about Benjamin Franklin's words, out of adversity comes opportunity. And so what we want to be able to look at is how have we been able to change and look at things differently this year to see what enormous opportunity there is as a result of some of the activities that are going on. And for us, we will shamelessly plug the regions. That's why we're here. It was in the title. I'm sorry if that disappoints, that's definitely where we're hanging out this afternoon. But what we want to really be able to do is talk about how does that actually work for all of us. As people in business and startups in Australia, we actually all benefit if we can work well together, and Joe and I believe that there's a way that we can do this, and that's part of the conversation that we want to have today. So Joe, I guess that's a bit of a segue. We've seen we want to plant, a seed or two in the minds of people today and get them to have a bit of a think about it. We've got some questions that we want to ask them later. But talk to me about moving the needle in regional Australia. What does that look like for you, do you think? What are you seeing?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. An opportunity that's come out of COVID and is moving things online. I think when we sort of work out what the real world looks like in the next sort of 12 to 18 months, I think that we're going to land on a really interesting hybrid model, which is just going to mean such an amazing opportunity for regionally based people, because in the past, this festival in particular, with most festivals, most conferences, most anything that involved a physical workshop or conference, it required people that lived in the bush to either drive hours, to catch a couple of planes, to have at least a night in a hotel. The cost was, especially for startups, was such a restricting factor to be able to go and attend professional development, networking opportunities, all of these things were quite often just out of the reach of people that were based in the regions. And so I sometimes think we've done so many amazing things in Australia with almost a hand tied behind our back. So I think that this little playing field where we get to have as much access, that we're going to see some really incredible things coming out of the bush. So, as you said, heading around the title of our session around moving the needle in regional Australia, I think that this is, like you mentioned, a really good opportunity for us to shine a light on things that are happening out here already, but then also opportunities for businesses that are based in Metro Australia to engage with customers in the regions, with suppliers in the regions, with collaborators in the regions. And I see that will just keep getting driven, because I think we're seeing a real focus back on nationalism, I think, has come with the borders being closed, that where people are travelling domestically, they're looking more closely at where their food comes from and the food miles on the things that they're putting into their mouth. And they're also looking to engage employees or team members in domestically. So it's going to be really a really interesting sort of thing. That's definitely what we're seeing with Pointer, is that businesses that have previously offshored things like finance or bookkeeping, those sorts of things that may have gone abroad, they're bringing them back to Australia and looking for options to grow their team with Australians, and they're actually looking to regional Australia as an option. And they can access this talent pool that previously hadn't been accessed.
Absolutely, and there's some great examples. So Suncorp Bank, one of the big national banks, has their office for their call centre in Toowoomba. Regional community. I think there's about 300 people that live and work in Toowoomba for the call centre for Suncorp. That's amazing. It's much better being regionally than potentially overseas, but to be able to have that many people have a role in the bank and being able to do that, have that call service, a service centre regionally based, is really exciting. And I guess that's one of the things that often we think about. from those of us that live in sort of central Queensland or west of any of the oceans or main cities, you know, we often think about, we look to the east for our knowledge, we look to the east for our saving, and that's actually not what we need. You know, we need to be able to sometimes get the east to look west as well and see what can we do out there, what are our opportunities out on when we're actually not focusing our energies out there. I just wanted to touch on something that you raised then around the virtual network space, and I think it's really important. And then we'll get back onto what we're actually talking about this afternoon, Joe. But one of the comments I made earlier is there's 8.8 million people in regional Australia, and yet there has been some work done about the time lag, and so particularly for startups, the time it takes if you are sitting somewhere, and I'm going to use Gundawindi as an example. If you're sitting in Gundawindi and you're trying something new, research that was done here locally with our council and University of Southern Queensland, it showed that for people that were trying to break into this startup space, and particularly in the manufacturing area, when you looked at it in comparison with somebody trying to do something similar in Brisbane or Ipswich or the Gold Coast, where there's hubs and maker spaces and all of these great things going on, it took 2 years longer. The runway was 2 years longer for businesses, and it probably cost them $100,000 more to get to the same point of launch than it did any other businesses in a more metropolitan area. Now, that is massive. That is really a humongous cost before we actually start anything, really. And so I think from a regional perspective, what we need to be doing is also making sure we are tapping in to all of the networks that are available to us in metropolitan areas to be able to shorten that length of time and be able to connect in with those people much more quickly. And I think COVID will actually help people do that, because more of the networking has had to go online. And I think that'll be really interesting to see for anything that is quite new regionally. I think that will be a really important thing for businesses to know, that they need to tap quickly into existing networks that are sitting in Toowoomba, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Cairns, wherever it might be.
Well, I was just going to say, before you move on from that, though, I think I can counter that with not statistics, because I haven't run an in-depth research project like Thank You Gundawindi Council. But I think something that is to keep in mind, though, that length and time spent getting ready for launch can be one challenge that we face here. And like I said, that doing things with one hand behind back is often a thing. But I think as well, there is so many advantages to starting businesses on the flip side in the region. So I will use myself as a first example. Like you've said in my intro, I've started 3 businesses in the regions, 2 of which I've sold and moved out of. And for me, as someone in my mid to late 30s, that has been able to have some pretty serious chunks of time out of the earning stage of life, as far as startups not generating a huge amount of revenue and businesses reinvesting money back into the business and stuff, and not doing a huge amount of wage drawing, etc. Not that I recommend that, but I can hand on heart say there is absolutely no way, and with Pointer in particular, there is no way that I could have got to this of where the business is now if I had been living in a metro area. For me to be able to, with 2 small kids, to be able to be out of the workforce, in inverted commas, as far as adding revenue and income into our household. There's no way we could have done that if we were paying a mortgage in Sydney, or I was having to pay the childcare fees and amounts of money that it costs for childcare in Sydney. I've been able to do that because the cost of living is so much cheaper. Like, I can run a business on the smell of an oily rag, run a family on the smell of an oily rag. And I think that that's something that we definitely, where access to networks and those sorts of things that have been, I suppose, a roadblock previously, pre-COVID, I think with those roadblocks being lifted, again, this is where I see so much opportunity to think about where you're actually living and where you headquarter your business and things. Like, I have a friend who has a shoe company, so she designs shoes. They're produced in China, but she gets everything shipped to so she warehouses on their farm. She has a shed out there. She's not paying for warehousing anywhere else. She is putting money through the local post office where she goes and ships all the orders from there. And I think that she has said as well that is just such a huge cost that she would have had to have been paying for if she was in an apartment in a metro area. So things like that, I think, need a mention just while we're doing these things along the way. But
and that's absolutely one of the take homes that we want from this session, right? Think about if you are a metro startup and you're considering how you can extend the amount of money that you've got, that you can do whatever. Seriously, think about if you can run your business from the regions, because I assure you can, and to be able to do that and have the support of a small community around you is one of those ways that might actually, particularly when you're establishing and growing your startup, moving regionally becomes one of those options that you have to be able to ensure that you can afford to deliver the great work that you want to put out into the world. Joe mentioned that I'm one of those many people who started a business because there were no jobs available in town when I was leaving my last role, and so I needed to be able to do that without a whole lot of cost in setting things up. And again, we were able to start a business in the main street of Gundawindi and buy a building and get it renovated and set up for less than a home loan, because it's a small community. We can do it with friends, and we can actually stretch how far some goes. I want to make sure that that we can get into some of the chunky stuff that we want to talk about. I'm also very conscious that there's concerns that people might not have the right earring attire for this session. We do seem to have really rocked it. We're very excited to be on national whatever we're on, so we have worn our favourite earrings, but don't panic. You please stay part of this session, even if you're not wearing earrings. But I do want to just talk about the three areas that we want to get out of today, the three messages, I guess, that we're keen for you to move away from our session around, and part of that is also asking you some questions. So I'm going to put some things, ask you to pop some things into the chat that we can all see. But I guess if we look at what are the three things we really want people to get from this, Joe's touched on the first one already, or one of them. It's around that metro startups should consider relocating when in establishment and growth phase. They afford to do more in regional areas. So that's absolutely one of the things that we want to be able to connect you into. The other one is that we want City to do business with the country. We actually want to work with you all. And there's lots of ways that we can do that, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But we are absolutely having this conversation from an economic perspective, from a good business decision perspective, and from a regional economic development space. So this is not about you feeling warm and fuzzy because you've hung out with people regionally. This is absolutely going to be good for business for you and for us, and we want to talk about that. And then the other part is that you absolutely can run a global business outside of a capital city, and we've got a plethora of examples of people that are doing that. So we want to do business with you. The city and the bush can be doing business better and differently than we have in the past. You can absolutely run a global business from rural, regional and remote Australia. And if you want to be able to look at how you can stretch things and move to areas where there's very little COVID, think about regional areas. And that's part of what we want to talk about. But I've got a question, or Joe, I might even throw to you. Do you want to ask the group one of our questions and see if they can add some points around that?
Sure. I can't see where they're going to all over that. I can be managing those. Yep. Fabulous. Okay. Well, the first thing that we were really interested to know with the people that were watching today was whether or not you already have metro-based business or startup, if you already have clients or customers that are based in the regions. So if you do you actually consider how you market to them in a different way. And how do you know if you're hitting the mark? So while you're having a bit of a think about that, a really interesting little incident that I had. I was speaking at a conference in Canberra a few years ago, and I was running a session. I actually remember what the session was around, but it was something around business in the regions, blah, blah, blah. And I had two guys that both were Melbourne-based, and I sort of did a quick whip around in the group. It was a breakout session, quick whip around with the group to see why they had come along to my session. And two of these guys sort of put their hand up and were a little bit embarrassed to say, but they genuinely were, they said, we're in marketing. We're a Melbourne-based agency. We know a third of our market lives in the country and we just don't know how to sell to them. I've never met anyone from the country. They came so that they could shake hands and talk to someone that lived in the country to even just get a slight insight. And these guys had big clients. Like, I want to say one of the big car companies was like one of the national car companies was one of their clients. And that fact that disconnect there, that they said, look, we don't go to the country. We've got everything we need in Melbourne. I've never met anyone from the country and I do not know how to sell things to you. So we're really interested to hear you're already doing so. How do you know you're having any luck? Are you following up on those? Have you got anything back in there, Jules?
Yeah, so Dwight has mentioned he was in Orange, so lived in Orange in New South Wales, and it was a strong country town with good community. Low overheads and internet. So obviously, Dwight, internet and access to reliable internet is one of those things that we need to keep pushing for from a regional perspective, but it worked for him when he was in Orange. The other thing that I just want to float, and for people that are listening to podcasts on the call, if you look up regionally speaking, it's one that's been developed by Phoebe Tully at University of Southern Queensland, and I think Phoebe might actually be part of our virtual crowd this afternoon. So Phoebe talks with businesses from the regions all of the time, and it really does. It's a different conversation. The pain points are different. What they're looking to spend money on is different. How they market, as Joe said, is incredibly different to what happens in metropolitan areas. And so I guess one of the things that we think can be really useful is if you are in a metropolitan area and you have a business that you're running from there or a scale up that you're running, regional people across the world are not that different in lots of ways. So regional Australia, regional America, regional wherever else, there's cultural similarities in that world. So if you are looking to grow a global area, it's not actually just regional Australia you need to understand, it's regional people full stop. So talk to people in the regions around how you can do that. And two of those people that you've got in your network now to be able to have those conversations with you is Joe and myself. And that's one of the things that we really want to kind of push there, that you need to test your ideas differently for regionally based customers or clients because their needs will be slightly different and how they go for you might be slightly different. Why they're wanting to use you could be slightly different, and that's one of those things that we want to be able to touch on. So if you're looking for different ways to be able to do things, regionally speaking, as a podcast is a great one. Mel's put here is one of the. Oh yeah, go.
I was going to say, just like more than happy to field questions and things from people or connection requests and those sorts of things, because I think something to really note is that concept of degrees of separation is out the window in country areas. It's pretty much 2 degrees of separation. You can generally find someone that can track down someone for you pretty quickly in an area or an industry or those sorts of things. But if you're finding that you are still having trouble sort of meeting people from the country, again, like these guys from the marketing agency in Melbourne, what you can consider doing is having a think about where you do your offsites. So if you run a business in an office in metro area, or if you've got a distributed team, rather than getting everyone into the office into one of the capital cities, go and do your offsite in Toronto. do it at, so Gillian Kilby, another firecracker from rural Australia, she has started an absolutely incredibly beautiful co-working space in the main street of Dubbo, in a 100-plus-year-old building that's been renovated, that you could be in the main street of a metro area, but go and do your offsites there. One, it's super cheap to put people in hotels for a couple of nights in the country. Two, you can still have a beautiful space and meeting rooms and those sorts of things, but you're also then going to have the opportunity to people. They walk among us. And it's just a fabulous way to consider. That's another way of actually meeting people that are in your areas that you could be selling into.
A really good point on the chat around some of the struggles are around when there's non-local landlords, so when people from out of town own the buildings, and setting commercial rent, so it becomes really unviable for a lot of us as smaller businesses to take that on, which means you end up with some of our little towns with a lot of vacancies in the main street. And we've talked about this before. Before I get your point on that, or if you've got any thoughts on that, Mel, I just if you have a look at Renew Australia, they're an organisation that really works about revitalising areas. They've done a lot of really great stuff in Newcastle. There's some work that they're doing in Toowoomba. So if you look up Renew Australia, they can be a really great model that you can have a look at that might help your community in how you want to handle that conversation. Because even in our community, we're talking at the moment about retail. There's people that are looking for retail space, but they don't need a big shop. So how do we go back to those kind of market bazaar sort of things, you know, the market concept where there are multiple businesses in one space that are renting a bigger area and sharing different things. And that's really how the Business Hub started. I did 12 months at home working from our sunroom, and that was just about enough to tip me over the edge. So, you know, it's one of those that Renew Australia would be one that would be a really good one to be able to have a look at.
Another one there, Jules, is Sarah Prime, who is based in rural South Australia. She has a company called Champions Academy, and she does a lot of work with rural communities and that regentrifying main street, really working around that attraction and retention of population piece. So as far as getting rural communities back on track and stuff, Sarah Prime is another really interesting person to reach out to as well. Again, say Joe sent you. That is another good one to talk to.
Well, you all absolutely have carte blanche to just use our names with all of these people. One of the other things I wanted to just quickly mention too is around how regionally we are able to use some of the platforms that started very metropolitanly, if that's a word, and we've been able to use that to be able to provide some diversity of income for people in the regions. And so Airbnb is a really obvious one at the moment. You know, during drought, maybe part COVID, but during drought, you know, we have a lot of people and certainly lots of farms and properties that have got multiple houses on the farm, shearing, quarters, whatever it might be. And so to be able to get people to work with a platform like Airbnb to be able to ensure that people have got an opportunity when they come to a place like Gundawindi or the Rock or wherever they're going, where it's not just the motels that they can stay in. And so we've seen a lot of people really benefiting from that. So you look at Herman House at Calbar has done beautiful things, and as a result of the Airbnb that's worked, they've renovated a church as a space, and then they've got a barn that they use for weddings. And so it's created this whole Whitechapel Calbar brand now, which has absolutely reinvented this small community of Calbar in the scenic rim area. And so that could be another really good example to have a look at, Mel, and just see if that helps with what's happening there. Joe, go back and talk to me about people running global businesses from the bush. That was one of the things that we wanted people to be able to take away from today. Who in your network is doing some really great things around that?
I don't know. Where to start? I'm just thinking, even just taking it back a level to like national businesses, and I think that a lot of people were like pre-COVID, even so, like we're really starting to get into this concept that just because you were regionally based didn't mean you only serviced your main street. So I think that has been something on the move, has been completely steamrolled along by COVID. I think we ran some workshops up in the Snowy Valleys area of New South Wales. So they got absolutely slammed by bushfires over the summer, then COVID. They're a big tourist area, but they're a free area, like really tough times with that. But businesses that had traditionally serviced like a shoe shop in the main street, that just having that mindset change around the fact that like, oh, this is not just the only people that I can service. And so not only can I be selling shoes nationally, I can be selling shoes internationally. So I think that mindset shift, which might sound a bit obvious for a lot of metro-based businesses, especially for startups in the startup world where you are aiming for scale and aiming for 10x yesterday at a global level. I think what we've seen a huge amount of is that grassroots business who never thought people outside of their community would shop there. So I think that's a really interesting concept. I just wanted to go back to your Airbnb concept though as well. I think that it's close to 12 months, if not 12 months ago, that the Buy from the Bush extravaganza kicked off with Grace Brennan driving that, and that concept of making purchases and driving economic development and stimulus via spending in the regions. That was also then rolled out into a stay in the bush thing, and I think that's something, if you haven't come across the hashtag and of stay in the bush, that with domestic travel being pretty much what we do now, that's another really interesting way to sort of get out on the road, to not only be spending money in those towns, but it's the most amazing way to be meeting people. And if you're in this startup world but you are maybe working for someone else but you're actually desperate to have your own business and your own startup on things, there are plenty of problems that still needs solved in the bush. And you come and meet someone, and what might seem like quite a niche problem to be solved in one rural town, you can almost guarantee that you could multiply that many, many times across regional Australia, which then quite often could be then scaled across rural areas all over the world. So I think if you think about there's so many similarities, like you mentioned, with the rural US, with rural Canada, with lots of parts of Africa, that big agricultural areas and big challenges around space and population density, there is just like, this is like startup heaven out here. You can just come and pick up and you can test them on people really quickly as well. So I think that we sort of haven't really talked about people that may be like still thinking for a startup idea as well. That's another opportunity of that engagement with the regions.
And I think even for startups who are looking at some of these world problems, test early, not only with people in the cities, right? If, we will often talk to people and they're, we're going to solve these issues in agriculture. And I'm like, oh, great, who are you talking to? No, we haven't talked to anybody yet. They're going to solve the problems. That probably is not going to work, So how do we help you get those relationships quicker? Because once it's there and you're rusted on, it will make things so much easier down the track. So if you are already testing things that you think could be rolled out, have a talk to us and let's see about how they can, how we can connect you with people who are doing this. All of the industry associations, a lot of the research and development corporations are looking to find people to help them solve problems. And this is part of how we can actually bring really clever people from the city and really clever people from the regions together to solve the world's problems. And that's really what we think can be achieved. I do have a couple of other people that I think are doing some cool things, Jo, that I think are worth mentioning. So some people, and you and I both know some of these people, but certainly if you look at the work that Rebel Black is doing with the rural woman, so Rebel's based in Lightning Ridge and has set up this amazing virtual for women across Australia and now more broadly across the world. She has won awards that have seen her go to Paris to accept various awards around using technology to build networks for women from a business perspective as well as a personal development side of things. So if you are, there's some gaps sometimes, there's women in ag and there's women in heels, but sometimes there's not something in the middle for Julia who's not in ag but doesn't wear heels either. So there's really some niche opportunities for you if we come back to the female focus around being able to find your crowd, find the people that you want to be able to hang out with. Rebel certainly does a really great job of that across a few different themes. So I think she does, and from Lightning Ridge, Northwest New South Wales. So another great example. And the other one, and it would be remiss of me to say, because again, there's ladies that have noticed the earrings. So let's also talk diamonds really quickly. But you look at the work that Christina Duddy has done with the Diamond Hunter. So she's a great friend of mine here in Gundawindi. It started with her doing some research for her own piece of jewellery that she wanted to create, and that has resulted in a business now that she runs where she designs and supports people that are wanting to create beautiful pieces of jewellery that have diamonds involved. She sources them, works with jewellers, all of the rest of it. And that came from her wanting to do something for herself, seeing that there was a passion, a few of us asking her lots of annoying questions, a few of us sending all of our husbands to her, and all of a sudden she has this amazing business, which actually most of her clients are from urban and metropolitan areas. So it's really great that it hasn't made a difference for them whether she's Gundawindi based or not. The majority of guys, particularly sourcing engagement rings, come from Melbourne and Sydney. So that's fantastic that they found her in that way.
Interesting. I think that there's some perfect examples of people that are again creating what seems like a relatively small business that then just explodes with the joys of social media or the joys of just being online. I was just wanting to sort of circle slightly back just as far as because I think we sometimes we're in it and we know that the networks are here and that for us it's relatively easy to get in touch with people and connect people and those sorts of things. I talked about that concept of going and doing your off-sites in a rural area, places like the Exchange. But I think something that is a really interesting place to find those things is co-working spaces. And I know that those that are in metro areas, especially in the big cities, that a lot of startups do are tenants or were tenants in co-working spaces in areas in the city. And I think that people are quite surprised often when I say, oh, well, I have an office in the co-working space in Wagga, and so my kids go to school in town, and so I drive the kids into school, and then we'll work out of the office in town a couple of days a week, at home a couple of days a week. But these rural co-working spaces are all over the place. They are really, really good, spots and central locations to go and actually start making these connections for the first time if you're looking for an in there. Jules, I'm just conscious of the time. Do you want to put any questions to the crowd or if there's any more that you wanted to answer that are in the chat there already?
Yeah, great. So some of the questions in the chat we've kind of touched on already. We did have another question for people online for feedback, and I think we've got a bit of a regional cohort crowd with us today. So you might already have some other ideas that you want to share on this team for those that are watching. But I guess what we were also curious around is, what are some of the cultural differences that you think there might be between city and country businesses or startups? Let's interchange that. But, have you had any experience around these cultural differences? Is there an assumption that you're holding on to that might actually be holding your business or your startup back because you haven't had a chance to test it with somebody? Just keen to see if there's anything around the culture between city and country that you might have experienced or you have as a perception.
Well, while people are having a bit of a think and any comments to write on that, I would quite often open some of my keynotes or presentations that I would make in a metro area with introduce myself, that I'm the founder and managing director of a tech company. I live in regional Australia, and I have a university and all of my teeth. And people would sort of look at me and be like, oh, I'm comfortable to laugh at her because I know she's joking, but their reaction was very much like, you're actually surprising me, though, that you are wearing like a suit and heels and that you are articulate and that you have started a business from there. And so I have experienced firsthand quite often that disconnect with like that image of bumping and what that translates to when me as a country person taking my business to a metro stage. Those are some of the challenges that I've faced there. So I'd be interested to hear what others have got to say around that.
Phoebe has written in. She's a long-time listener, first-time commenter. She wrote, one of the people I spoke to on Regionally Speaking, her podcast, mentioned how he finds the slowness of regional business his biggest frustration. So the speed at which things happen was a frustration for him working with people regionally.
Isn't that interesting?
Also, maybe a fair call in some circumstances. Who knows?
Yeah. And I sometimes think, though, that I've had, yes, that experience, also had that experience with metro bases as well. But that quite often dealing with a smaller regionally based business is that I've found things actually happen quicker because you're talking to the check like the check signer, that you're talking to the head of the business quite often, that you can actually action things and get things moving a lot faster. So that's really interesting to hear, Phoebe.
Ed's got a really good point too. He follows up around, is it about the logistics side of things, freight, post, getting the information there, getting stuff done and getting it out again. And Ed, I would certainly agree with that. We have seen where often it is really challenging to get things in and out of town physically because of some of those logistics issues that we all probably deal with in regional areas. I, Joe, want to come back to this piece around, one of the things that we said we wanted people to get before, or one of the main messages for today was around wanting to be able to look at how people from the city can do business with the country. And I guess what I would like to do is give you, what's your ideas from a point of remote perspective? How can you work with businesses in the city? Let's use you as an example.
Well, look, as far as working with me in particular, businesses in metro areas can always advertise jobs that they've got vacancies in their business with us. If they don't mind where the person the job is going to live, it's actually an amazing way to almost hack getting a regional point of view into your business is employ someone. Like that's a really good life/business hack as far as getting insider information from the regions in there. What about yourself? I always would have thought that if you're in a consulting business, I think sometimes even just if you find that you're not finding the information you need, you can actually pay a consultant that's regionally based to actually give you feedback and almost buy networks. For an example, I think that's I don't know, from my point of view, watching your business as this.
Yeah, certainly. And I guess the other piece if we look at it from a leadership perspective as well, what we want to make sure is that all voices are heard. Yeah. So we talk about making sure women are heard, making sure migrant backgrounds are heard. So where is the minority voice of a regional person useful in the conversations that you're having and useful in the data and the content that you're trying to collect, and how does that help you? So we know that there are a whole lot of voices that are often missing from around the decision-making table or around the planning table or around anything else. So, thinking about that, how can we help you get some of those people around the table for you? I think that would probably be good.
I suppose it's looking at where we're doing a better job at diversity as a whole. So you're cultural, your gender, your like age diversity. I suppose that for us to put geographic diversity on as a way to sort of move this forward. We've got 30 seconds left, Jules. Where can people find you or get in touch with you online?
They can find me on LinkedIn or our Engage and Create Facebook page. What about for you?
Yeah, I live half my life on LinkedIn. Our website, pointerremote.com.au. Get in touch with us.
Kelly's got a question about if we wanted to start a new business in a regional area. Kelly, I'd go to council or Chamber of Commerce, economic development officers or Chamber of Commerce. See ya.